Witness the classic biblical tale come to life as the young shepherd boy David fearlessly confronts the towering warrior, Goliath. Discover the unparalleled courage and unwavering faith displayed in this iconic showdown between a seemingly invincible giant and a humble hero chosen by God. The story of David and Goliath is one of the most famous biblical tales that has captivated readers for centuries. Set in ancient times, this epic battle showcases the extraordinary triumph of a young shepherd named David over the formidable warrior Goliath. It is a timeless saga of courage, faith, and the triumph of the underdog. In the ancient land of Israel, the Philistines and Israelites were locked in a fierce battle. The Philistines, feared for their mighty warriors, had a secret weapon in their notorious giant, Goliath. Towering at over 9 feet tall and clad in heavy armor, Goliath was known as the champion of the Philistine army. His striking presence alone struck fear into the hearts of all who crossed his path. Against all odds, David, a humble shepherd from the town of Bethlehem, rose to the challenge. Armed with nothing but his slingshot and unwavering faith in God, David volunteered to face Goliath in single combat. Despite his youth and lack of experience, David was fueled by an unshakable belief that strength lies not in physical stature, but in the power of one's spirit and conviction. As the two adversaries stood opposite each other on the battlefield, David's audacity was met with ridicule and mockery from onlookers. But undeterred, he loaded his slingshot with a single stone and let it fly, aiming for Goliath's one vulnerable spot, his forehead. Miraculously, David's aim was true, and the stone struck Goliath with a devastating force. The giant fell to the ground, stunned and lifeless. In an instant, David emerged victorious as the mighty Goliath met his ultimate defeat. The battle of David and Goliath is not merely a tale of physical prowess, but a testament to the power of strategy and determination. It teaches us that with faith, courage, and resourcefulness, even the most insurmountable obstacles can be overcome. This legendary tale resonates through the ages as it symbolizes the potential within each of us to conquer our personal giants. It reminds us that it is not our circumstances or limitations that define us, but rather our inner strength and resilience. Beyond its religious significance, the story of David and Goliath continues to inspire people from all walks of life. It serves as a reminder that no matter how daunting our challenges appear, with the right mindset and unwavering determination, we can face them head-on. In conclusion, the epic battle of David and Goliath is a timeless example of how courage, faith, and cunning can lead to victory even against overwhelming odds. It stands as a poignant reminder that our greatest strengths often come from within, and that with persistence and an unyielding spirit, we can overcome any obstacle that stands in our path. Outline: I the Challenge 111, 2. Jesse sends David with food 12:22, 3. David seeks more information 23:31, 4. David convinces Saul 32:39, 5. David converses with Goliath 40:47, 6. Victory over Goliath 48:58. 17. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shochoh, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shochoh and Azekah in Ephes-dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath, of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had an helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. 9. If he be able to fight with me, and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants, and serve us. 10. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight together. 11. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. One. Who were the Philistines? Why did there seem to be no actual fighting in this battle? How tall was Goliath in meters? Why do you think the author includes so many details about his size and his armor? So are giants just the things of myths and legends? 6. What other giants are mentioned in the Bible? 1. What can we learn about Goliath from this passage? 9. What can we see about his attitude toward the Israelites? About himself? 9. How did the Israelite army respond to this challenge? Why? Lorem ipsum. Genesis 10:13-14, 21:34. Early biblical references to the Philistines. Exodus 13:17. By the time of Moses, the Philistines' presence had expanded in Canaan. 1 Samuel 13:19-22, Judges 1:19. These verses show the disadvantage most Jews faced when facing the Philistines. Perhaps the Philistines had advanced to the Iron Age, while Israel was still in the Bronze Age. Genesis 14:5-7, Deuteronomy 2:10-11, 2:20-21, 3:11, 13, Genesis 6.4, Joshua 11:21, 22. Various verses where giants are mentioned in the Bible. 1. It is likely that the Philistines had Aegean origins. In Genesis 10:13-14, they are listed together with Caphtorim, and Caphtor in Hebrew referred to the island of Crete, and perhaps even the whole Aegean region. Also, their pottery would seem to indicate they were from that area. In 2005, 2 pieces of pottery shards were discovered, was found in the ruins of Gath, with 2 names resembling Goliath, showing a linguistic link between the 1 Samuel 17 account and history. 2. In history, sometimes armies would each send a champion or champions to represent their army against the best warrior of their opponents. Here we see that the Philistines had a champion of champions. Goliath was from Gath. This was one of the 5 key cities of the Philistines. He was about 10.5 feet tall, which would make him about 3 feet, or a little less than 1 meter, taller than Yao Ming. His coat of mail was 125 pounds, 56 kuis, and his spear was 15 pounds, 7 kuis. Additionally, he had a helmet, protection on his legs, a javelin, and a spear. His armor-bearer carried a shield for him. Goliath was a very formidable warrior. 4. Goliath came out day after day for 40 days to taunt the armies of Israel. He offered a deal which certainly didn't look very appealing to the Israelite army. His deal was that if he defeated the Israelite warrior, then the Israelites would be slaves for the Philistines. But if the Israelite warrior won, then the Philistines would be slaves of the Israelites. 5. No one in the Israelite army wanted to take Goliath up on the challenge. They were terrified. Goliath looked unbeatable. He was far taller than them. He would have been far heavier too. In addition, he was well armed and well protected. The Israelites were way behind the Philistines militarily, and we see in 1 Samuel 13:19-22 that at one point there were only 2 swords in the whole Israelite army. It is likely that they were not well equipped with armor either. No one wanted to step out and risk their life against this giant. In their minds, it would have been insanity to do so. How could any of them possibly defeat Goliath? This obstacle was beyond them. 12. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons, and the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. 3. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle, and the names of his 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, and next unto him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. 14. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. 15. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. 16. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. 17. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp of thy brethren. 18. And carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. 19. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. 20. And David rose up early in the morning, and left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went, as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench, as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. Discussion questions. 1. What do we learn about David's family from this passage? How about David? 2. What was the battle like when David arrived? Verse 21. One. Enter David. In verses 1:11 we learn about the background for this famous story. Both armies were locked in a stalemate, with no one willing to accept Goliath's challenge, and the Philistines not wanting to give up their one-on-one advantage. In the previous verses we learned the background for this battle. Now we see David's background. David is not a typical candidate for a champion to face Goliath. Just like in 1 Samuel 16, we see that his 3 oldest brothers represent more logical choices. They were actually members of the army, while David was a shepherd who only made occasional trips to the battlefront for carrying supplies to his brothers there. In verse 17 we see that Jesse sent David to the front with some food for his brothers and a gift for the commander of their regiment. Take note that David was not part of the army. He was not responsible to answer Goliath's challenge. This was not in his job description. No one could have blamed in the slightest if he went to the front, gave his brothers the food, got news from them, and returned again. He had not been commanded to do anything more. 2. David arose early in the morning. We see in these verses that David was faithful to what his father told him to do. This is important. It wouldn't have been appropriate if David had neglected his father's instructions to go off and do something else, but he finished his personal obligations first. Verse 23 to 24-23. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. T4. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. Verse 25 to 26-25. And the men of Israel said, Have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be, that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? Verse 27 to 28-27. And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killeth him. 28. And Eliab his eldest brother heard when he spake unto the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, Why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride, and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. Verse 29 to 31-29. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? 30. And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner, and the people answered him again after the former manner. 31. And when the words were heard which David spake, They rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. Four. Why do you think David asked about the potential reward for killing Goliath? Was this good or bad to inquire about? How did Eliab react to David? Why may have reacted like this? Perhaps jealousy. What does this teach us about human nature? So how supportive does David's family appear toward him now that he has been anointed as the future king? 1 verses 23-24. While David was at the battle line getting news, Goliath came forward again, for another round of mocking and taunting. The Israelite soldiers once again fled. In 40 days of challenges, not one soldier seems to have reacted differently. Nobody wanted to step out. They were afraid, and with good reason, but this fear did not drive them to God for help. It drove them to cower and hide behind rocks. The soldiers talked together about the financial incentives offered for the soldier who killed Goliath. Even this extensive incentives, including marriage to the king's daughter, was not enough to entice them to overcome their fear. 2. David seeks more information. Before David made a decision, he wanted to fully understand the situation. Part of that was inquiring about the reward offered for beating Goliath. Why do you think David inquired about this reward? Perhaps David was motivated partly for the reward, but the bigger concern to him appears to be God's reputation. It really irks him that this unbelieving Philistine is able to walk up and down taunting God's people, and by extension God himself. It seems that David is incredulous about the situation. He cannot believe why nobody has stepped out to do something about it. 3. Eliab is angry with David. There are several possible reasons why Eliab was angry with David. One reason is that David was anointed king and he wasn't. He could have still been harboring some jealousy because of that. Another reason is that Eliab may have felt guilty that he and the other soldiers had cowered in fear, rather than boldly confronting Goliath. In addition, sibling rivalry and a general tendency to look down on one's younger siblings may have added fuel to the fire. Regardless of the exact reasoning, we see that Eliab had a very low opinion of David. He minimized David's work, and he prescribed evil motives to David which could not be proven. We need to be very careful not to treat others like Eliab treated his brother. Application. We need to speak words of affirmation and encouragement to others. This is generally far more effective than criticism. Also, we should avoid pretending that we know other people's motivation for their actions. This can be very infuriating and discouraging to others if we are wrong, and we often will be, since we cannot see their hearts. 4. David was not easily discouraged. His brothers disrespected him and looked down on him. We do not see his other brothers defending him here. This could be very discouraging. Many people get their sense of self-worth and self-esteem from their close family. When their family members look down on them, they may tend to become depressed and introverted, and believe the bad things others are saying about them. But David doesn't fall into this trap. Where should we get our sense of self-worth? Where do we get confidence from? Application. Do not become easily discouraged. Do not give up the moment an obstacle blocks your way. If God has called you to do something, you don't need to worry about pleasing people. Our job is to please God, not man. Verse 32, 32. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine." 33. And Saul said to David, "Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." And David said unto Saul, "Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock." Verse 35, 35. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. 36. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. 7. David said moreover, "The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion, and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said unto David, "Go, and the Lord be with thee." 1. What can we learn about David and his character in this section? 2. How did Saul think of David? Why did Saul not go, since he was the tallest person in the land? Sir, how did David convince Saul to let him try? How could David beat a lion and a bear? Why did David think he was able to beat the lion and bear? Why is this important? Why was David so angry about Goliath? 1. In verse 32 we see David's determination to fight against Goliath. From a worldly perspective, this decision made no sense. In the eyes of seasoned warriors, David was but a youth. Sure, he was brave, but he was not an experienced warrior. He wasn't even a part of the army. Eliab wasn't the only one who thought he was crazy. Saul did as well. 2. Here David tells the remarkable stories of killing a lion and a bear, which were attacking the flock. David wisely recognized that this was God's deliverance and believed that God would deliver him from Goliath in the same way. From the story of the lion and the bear, we can get a glimpse of God's divine providence. It would seem hard to imagine that a lion and bear attack could be good, but were they? These attacks led David to learn from a young age that God would be with him. They taught David that God is greater than anything he would face. They also taught David the need for boldness. Each of those events acted to greatly strengthen David's faith and reliance on God. But notice in neither case could David just sit back and do nothing. He had to act and believe that God would help him, which is a far cry from sitting and believing that God would deliver him. Application. Everything happens for a reason. God wants us to take initiative. God wants us to be bold. We must take action to overcome obstacles, but do so based on faith in God and not on ourselves. At the same time, if we know something is right, we must insist to do it even if it causes others to scorn and mock us. We serve God first, not man. 3. David declined Saul's armor. It did not fit and was therefore not going to help him in the fight. Wearing the armor would have caused him to fit in more. He could have gotten a bit more respect from his peers marching out to battle with Saul's armor. Even Goliath would have respected him a little more. It would have certainly been a temptation to wear the armor, if for nothing else than to get the people around him to stop laughing at him. 3. David declined Saul's armor. It did not fit and was therefore not going to help him in the fight. Wearing the armor would have caused him to fit in more. He could have gotten a bit more respect from his peers marching out to battle with Saul's armor. Even Goliath would have respected him a little more. It would have certainly been a temptation to wear the armor, if for nothing else than to get the people around him to stop laughing at him. But to do so would have probably been a fatal mistake. The armor would not have been enough to protect him from Goliath from man's standpoint, and by choosing that for the sake of pleasing people, he may have lost God's support. Once again, we learn the very important lesson that we must please God rather than man. Let's take this time to give a special thanks and shout out to 8-Bits, Outer 8-Bits K2V. Verse 40, 42, 40. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. 1. And the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. Verse 43, 45, 43. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. 44. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. 45. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. Verse 46, 47, 46. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee. And I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. One. How did David prepare? Why is it important that he did prepare? What lesson can we learn from this? How did Goliath react to David? Where did Goliath place his trust? 3. What do you think of David's statements to Goliath? What gave David this extreme confidence? 5. What applications can we make in our own life from these principles? 6. Are there any challenges in front of you that you need to depend on God to overcome? 7. What areas do you need to have this steel boldness? 1. David did not take the armor, but he did prepare. He prepared to use the skills and talents God had given him, namely using a sling. Many people speculate on why David picked up 5 stones. Any thoughts? In the end, it is all speculation. If he picked up 4 people, would speculate why 4, and if he picked up 6 people, would speculate why 6. I personally doubt he picked up 1 for Goliath and each of his brothers. To me, it is more likely he picked up several, so that he would be as well prepared as he could be. Would it have shown more faith if he only took 1 rock? There is a fine line between faith and blind bravado. I could claim to have faith and close my eyes while driving a car, but it doesn't make it a smart idea. David showed great faith in God by even marching out to confront Goliath, but that didn't mean he didn't have to do his very best to prepare for the fight. God's sovereignty and humans' responsibility are both taught throughout the Bible, and we need to have a correct view of both. 2. Like everyone else, Goliath disdained David. David was not the champion he was expecting. It is almost as if Goliath thought it was beneath him to even face this youth in battle. He noticed that David did not carry traditional armor or weaponry, which made him despise David even more. Was this whole thing a joke? Goliath could imagine no other outcome than the birds of the air feasting on David's body. Where did Goliath get his confidence? Here's the key lesson from this entire story. Goliath believed in himself. He believed in his strength. He relied on his experience. He trusted in his armor. 3. What did David believe in? David trusted in none of those things. David's confidence was in God. His motivation was to defend God's name and honor. He wanted to show to Israel's enemies that God was the one true God. He also wanted to show the Israelites that they could be bold and didn't have to hide in the shadows. God would be with them if they believed in him. He fully believed that he would win. He believed this because he knew who would be fighting on his side. Let's give another special thanks and shout out to another subscriber, Vanessa SF7J. Verse 48:51, 48. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hastened and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. 49. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. 50. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran, and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. Verse 52, 55, 52. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose, and shouted, and pursued the Philistines, until thou come to the valley, and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Sharaim, even unto Gath, and unto Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine, and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. Verse 56, 58, 56. And the king said, Inquire thou whose son the stripling is. 57. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him, and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. 58. And Saul said to him, Whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. One, was it wrong for David to kill Goliath? Did this violate one of the 10 Commandments, "Thou shalt not murder"? How did the army respond to David's victory? What does this show us about what a single person can accomplish for God? Why did Saul not know who David's father was considering David's time at the court, shown in chapter 16? 5. Why might Saul have wanted to know more about David's family? 6. How does event fit in with God's plan for David to be the next king? What lessons can we learn which we can apply to our lives today? 1. Do not be afraid of what others think about you. We are pleasing God, not man. 2. God may use any situations in our lives, even bad ones, to prepare us for tasks in the future. This can help us remember to be optimistic and thankful even in the midst of difficulties, knowing that God has a plan for us. 3. Do this in faith. If God is with you, who can be against you? 4. Take the right actions with the right motivations. God doesn't need us to defend His name, and yet it should still bother us when others let God's name be dragged through the mud. 5. Our actions can influence others to step out. David's boldness was contagious. The battle started with only David doing anything. It ended with the entire army being inspired to action. 6. God is a big God. He is bigger than anything we will face in this world. Attempt great things for God. Request great things of God. Before we end this video, let's give out another special thanks and shout out to Brosima Paul, Holy Spirit Revival TV. We want to help you study the Bible, obey the Bible, and teach the Bible to others.